Hi, my name is JR and welcome to photographycourse.net. Today, we're going to talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is the amount of time the shutter is open and is also a measurement of time. It's basically the timer for light coming into the camera and is what you want to change when you want to show movement in your picture. The most basic definition of shutter speed is how long the shutter takes to open and close. The three main adjustable parts of your camera are ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Shutter speed and aperture in photography together are what determines exposure because they both affect how much light is taken in while the picture is being taken. In addition to controlling light for proper exposure, shutter speed is also used artistically. You can use it at a very fast shutter speed to freeze the action of a dancer or to use a slow shutter speed to create light trails caused by cars at night. Shutter speed is measured in time increments ranging from full seconds to a fraction of a second, sometimes up to 1/8,000 of a second. The larger the shutter speed denominator, the faster the shutter opens and closes, exposing less light to the camera sensor. When you use a low shutter speed, the shutter is open longer and the image sensor exposed to light. Typically, you won't be using a shutter speed slower than 1/60 because any slower and you would include motion in your picture. As you start exploring the different speeds you can use, keep in mind that you use a shutter speed slower than 1/60, you will need something to stabilize your camera, such as a tripod. You need to use a shutter speed that is fast enough to avoid camera shake. It's nearly impossible for most people to hold the camera perfectly still. If you're using a shutter speed slower than 1/60, you should probably use a tripod so you don't blur your photos from movement while you're holding the camera. If it's difficult for you to hold the camera still, no problem. Try using a shutter speed that is 1/twice the focal length of your lens. If you're using a 50mm lens, use a shutter speed of at least 1/100. If you absolutely must stick with a slow shutter speed of 1/50 or less, we recommend using a wireless remote. It's not expensive and can make slow shutter photography a much more enjoyable experience. You don't have to compromise image quality and it provides plenty of flexibility for different styles of photograph. When determining what you want your shutter speed to be, you have to know if you want to see movement in the finished picture or if you want a frozen moment to take with you. Just remember, the slower your setting, the more movement and motion you will see in your picture. Now that you know what shutter speed is and how it functions, it's time for the fun part. Playing with shutter speed opens new creative possibilities in photography and can transform an average photo into one that's visually striking and full of energy. Here are a few creative ways you can incorporate shutter speed into everyday photography. Number one is motion blur and panning. Ever wondered how photographers capture motion so well? The key is low shutter speed. It's an excellent technique to use when you want to create a strong sense of time and movement in your photos. Many sports and street photographers use this technique to create dynamic in their shots. Here are a few tips to keep in mind when capturing motion blur. Number one is to use low shutter speeds. The exact shutter speed to use will depend on the speed of your moving subject, lighting situation, and other factors. Try experimenting at different speeds. Number two is to control your exposure. Slowing down the shutter speed means you're at risk of overexposing your photos. You want to find the right balance between shutter speed and lighting to capture the perfect motion blur effect. Number three is to use a tripod. Most of the time, you don't want the entire shot to be blurry. Therefore, you'll want to stabilize the camera so that way a few elements or the main subject of the shot is in complete focus. Other times, you'll want to freeze the motion by using a much faster shutter speed. You'll usually want to set your shutter speed to at least 1/250 depending on the speed of your subject. After experimenting with different speeds, you will be able to gauge which number is appropriate for your subject and situation. Keep in mind that when you increase your shutter speed, you'll need to correct the exposure by increasing ISO or opening your apertures so more light can enter your sensor. Long exposure photography can produce dramatic and stunning images that your eyes cannot see. Next time you see a marvelous star trail photo or a buzzing car trail nighttime shot, that was most likely captured using a long exposure technique. In order to do that, number one is to avoid camera shake and any vibration. Find a stable spot to secure your camera and use a sturdy tripod to reduce any kind of vibration. Many photographers use a remote shutter release for the most crisp, blur-free shots. This is especially crucial when you're using a macro or telephoto lens as it magnifies the blurred motion blur. Number two is to choose the correct shutter speed. Long exposure photography usually requires a shutter speed between 1 to 30 seconds. Make sure your aperture is set to a smaller number, typically between f11 to f32, for maximum sharpness throughout the image. You may also want to set your camera settings to bulb mode, which opens the shutter for as long as you like. We hope that these tips help you gain a better understanding of shutter speed and how it can create movement and interest in your photos. Not only can it help improve your overall photography skills, but also opens new opportunities for developing your creativity and visual style. If you found this video helpful, give it a like. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to check out our website, photographycourse.net. Again, my name is JR and thank you for watching.